The second object I've chosen for this theme on wood is the kind of object that doesn't matter who you are. If you see an object like this in a museum, you can't not be wowed by it. You can't just turn away and go on to the next thing. Anyone will immediately, I think, draw close to it. And when somebody draws close to it, it becomes apparent that it's the kind of object that only one person or maybe two people could see at any one time. Now, when we establish that for a work of art, and it's a very basic but useful thing to think about, how many people could see this at any one time? Well, if you say one person, that might indicate something about why it was made and who it was made for. I mean, clearly it's the kind of object that was made for one person to look at. And as it's a religious Christian theme, as it's a triptych that represents the adoration of the Magi, or in other words, the three kings coming to visit the infant Christ, that might indicate to us that it was made to be prayed in front of. That's possible. I mean, it's likely, isn't it? But at the same time, I would never want to reduce works of art to strictly that kind of function, because it's also a kind of wildly extravagant piece of imagination and a wildly extravagant piece of carving, because it is made out of boxwood, and so it belongs to a tradition in the Netherlands in the 16th century of using boxwood to create miniature religious works of art. And now when I say miniature, some of them are known as prayer nuts, so they are like the size of a large walnut sometimes, and those are, I mean, some of you will have seen them. It's like prizing open a walnut and inside having the scene of the crucifixion. It's completely incredible. Now, why is it box? Now, box is quite common. Box is a shrub. But the reason why box is such a great wood to use for this kind of work is that it's really, really dense. So it means that you can have very detailed carving and it would keep its strength. It's not going to split. Well, sometimes it will, but it's unlikely to split and flake and fall away as you carve it. So you can actually go into very, very close detail with it. The other thing I should say about box, the reason why box is such a great medium to use, is that it's got a really, really fine grain. And because it's got a very fine grain, it can have a sort of certain kind of smooth surface. It's not going to be too disrupted by the lines of grain that you would get in another wood, but it also means it's less likely to flake away and chip. It's more likely to be quite solid. Another object that's used, or traditionally boxwood is used for, is chess pieces, especially the white chess pieces. So you can imagine those are quite small, ornate objects. We don't know who it was made by. There's an artist called Dircksz who ran a workshop in the Netherlands. No one is even sure where in the Netherlands it was. Probably Delft, we think, but we don't really know for sure. We do know that they took sometimes decades to produce. They are incredibly labour intensive. They required an extraordinary level of patience and, as you can imagine, an unbelievably steady hand to get them right. Now, prayer nuts and little triptychs, boxwood triptychs like this one, was certainly had a devotional purpose. Obviously, of course, they were designed to aid prayer, but they also, I think, at least to me, they have a really fascinating relationship between the natural world and the spiritual one. The fact that they're made of wood, the fact that wood carries with it in Christianity so many layers of resonant symbolism, from the tree in the Garden of Eden to the cross on which Christ was crucified, to the fact that Christ trained as a carpenter. All of this symbolism of wood is very, very rich in the Bible. That has got to lend the object an additional level of potential meaning. And the kind of meanings that come about through repeated viewing. I mean, this is clearly, because of the size of it, because of the detail of it, it's made to be looked at lots of times, probably looked at every day, with different details revealing themselves depending upon how they're looked at and indeed who looks at them. So the complexity of the object and the relationship with the material is where its kind of spiritual quality emerges. But I think also, and something we can't overlook, is skill can be celebrated for its own sake. And a secular viewer looking at this object, or a viewer who comes from a different religious background, is not going to see it for its Christian symbolism. They're going to see it for an object that celebrates the sheer craftsmanship of the human hand and the sheer patience of human ingenuity and intelligence. So I see the object as having the ability to communicate beyond its very particular historic setting. I mean, these are quite eccentric, it's eccentric objects. I mean, it's quite a weird thing in some ways. It feels like a kind of, it feels sort of surrealist in a strange way, but that's part of the way it communicates to us as modern audiences. I mean, artworks have to be able to speak beyond their period, otherwise they're no use to us. They're just historical data. So this is something that I think continues, for me certainly, to be really communicative. And I think you can just see people going to see these things. If you go to the Wallace collection, which is where this object is, or if you go to the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, has some amazing boxwood objects, 9 times out of 10, people will stop in their tracks when they go through a room with works like this in, and they want to look close at it. And they will say things like, wow. And that is a really valid reaction, because the people making this object, that is partly what they wanted. They wanted their work to wow you, and it does. I really think it does.